We're looking at 10 years of very real hardship in Europe. I had a long conversation with Christine Lagarde recently. I was following her around. I made a half-hour documentary on her, and I was following her on various planes, and she is clearly thinking that even if we manage to keep the euro together, the IMF's reckoning is that we are looking at a decade, really, of pain in Europe. And that means 40% unemployment amongst young people in Spain. These are real hardships that Europeans are going through. Even in Greece, where the Germans are not satisfied that the Greeks are moving fast enough on cutting spending. We still have teachers having their jobs cut, firemen having their jobs cut, pensions being slashed. People are really hurting in Greece. And it's easy, I think, for the outside world to say those Greeks, they lived too hard, they lived, too expensively in the past, they didn't pay their taxes, they spent far too much. But that doesn't discount the fact that the Greek population at the moment, and it's nearly always the kind of middle class and lower middle class, are the ones that are actually paying the price for the government's previous excesses. So, I think we are, if you had to put your money somewhere, I would put it on the euro staying together. But Europe is not going to be a vibrant economic market. I think that is the single biggest challenge for America right now, and that's how to stay number one in the face of global competition and these changes that are going on at home. Let me give you a couple of numbers that show you the magnitude of what America is facing right now. In 2003, IBM had 6,000 employees in India and 135,000 here in America. IBM today has 110,000 employees in India. That is more than the number it has in the United States. GE, the world's largest manufacturer, has 5 R&D centers around the world. Only one of them is here in America. And of course, when we look at some of the entitlement issues, the situation is even more bleak. America spends far more on healthcare than any other country in the world. 17% of your GDP, compared to France's 11%, and that's the next big spender. But America only ranks 37th in the world in terms of the quality of its care. That puts you one place behind Costa Rica and one place above Cuba. Now, I don't think Americans want to be spending that much money for that poorer quality of care. And the costs, of course, as we all know, of healthcare are rising very fast. It'll be, by the end of the century, you'll be spending more than half of your GDP on healthcare. That's unsustainable. America has to find a way to address healthcare costs. In fact, the president and senior Republicans will tell you, America doesn't really have a deficit problem. What you have is a healthcare problem. Get healthcare spending under control, and you're halfway there to solving the battle. China. It is a real challenge for America. A decade ago, the United States accounted for 1/3 of the global economy. It's now less than a quarter, and it's going to fall to 1/6 by 2020 when China becomes the world's biggest economy. In the first global education study of its kind, conducted last year, Chinese students from Shanghai were compared to other international students. They'd never compared Chinese students before. They came out number one in maths, in writing, and in science. American students came in. Everyone knows that to fix the deficit, you're going to have to raise taxes and you're going to have to cut spending. And anyone that tells you otherwise is lying to you. That's what's going to have to happen. The American public knows it's going to have to happen like that. You're just not getting that kind of political debate from our leaders at the moment in Washington. And the big question is, are America's politicians up to the challenge? Part of the problem is that our politicians spend so much time raising all that money that I spoke about earlier. Congressmen and women spend 1/3 of their time fundraising rather than doing the job. 1/3 of their time making calls to raise money. They are terrified of compromise. And yet, as I said earlier, if you're going to do the big things in this country, you are going to have to compromise. We're not going to get entitlement reform without the two sides working together. But compromise has become a dirty word in the country. And without it, I don't think the big things can get fixed. We have fewer liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats on Capitol Hill than we've ever had in America. Olympia Snowe, a moderate Republican from Maine, resigned, said she wasn't running again because she felt she couldn't get the job done, because there was no room for compromise. And I think that without it, the country is in big trouble. We need to get back to a situation where we can compromise, and I fear that some of the responsibility for that comes from my profession. That we have a media that is so partisan at the moment that everything is seen through a political prism. Whether it is abortion or gun control or the deficit. I mean, since when did the deficit become such a hot political left-right issue? This is an economic issue. But you can't say or do anything at the moment in politics or in the media without it suddenly being seen as being overtly political and being tagged as either being left or right. And I think that that needs to change. And we know from all the studies that if somebody spends all their time listening to Fox News, they become increasingly conservative. If somebody spends all their time listening to MSNBC, they become increasingly liberal. You start thinking that what you're hearing on television is the facts. These are views channels to some extent, they're not news channels. And I think people need to get back to an old-fashioned space. This is where the BBC starts, shining a light on me. And my bosses start patting me on the head. But it is true, we need a forum where you can go and listen to the news and then go away and form your opinions. And I think then we would be in a space where we could start talking to each other again, and that's when America can start getting the big thing. This country looks an awful lot better from the bottom up than it does from the top down. It's as if people all around the country hasn't got the message that Washington is shut for business. They are still registering patents, coming up with startups, inventing new technologies, being innovative, as Rob said. Exactly the kinds of things that Rob has just talked to you about are the things that still make this the country you have to place your money on. I'm amazed as I travel around the country and I meet people. I met a woman in Florida who just started an ice cream business. No money, she'd managed to just raise it from friends and family. And then she carried on, working 16 hours a day just to have a corner store because she was a single mum, but she wanted to make sure she had something to leave her kids. Those are the kinds of people that are going to carry on making this country successful. Those are the kinds of people who are innately entrepreneurial. Some people say to me sometimes, when I listen to the debate, for example, over healthcare reform, and people talk about a socialized America, or America becoming socialist, you guys don't have a socialist bone in your body. This is fundamentally a country of entrepreneurs. The very thing that drove your ancestors to leave the countries that they live in, where they were feeling persecuted or where there wasn't the economic opportunity, make the dangerous trek to this country and set up in business in this country is what makes America entrepreneurial. And I think I sometimes see this country at the moment as two countries. You've got the dead hand of Washington, where things are not getting done, where the voters are ill-served by the quality of the debate. And then you've got people who are still coming up with new ideas. You've got, Silicon Valley.